Betsy Johnson is an assistant curator at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden with responsibility for overseeing the photography and works on paper collections. At the Hirshhorn, she's curated numerous exhibitions, which include the works of Tony Lewis, Yayoi Kusama, Basquiat, Banksy, and many more. Johnson completed her BA in Integrative Arts and MA in Art History at Pennsylvania State University. And she's a doctoral candidate in the Department of Art History and Archaeology at the University of Maryland, currently writing her dissertation on American conceptual artist Robert Barry. Would you all welcome Betsy Johnson?
Thanks, Corey. And I was very glad to get this invitation. I always enjoy having an opportunity to meet people in our community, in the community we live and work in the extended area. I think that's really special. So thank you for inviting me here. I'm happy to be here today with all of you. So when Corey reached out, he said one of the reasons he thought to invite me is that you all have a quarterly artist of interest that is chosen, and this spring it's Jeffrey Gibson. And Corey had come upon a talk that I did with Jeffrey Gibson that I guess was posted online. And so that was what kind of prompted his reaching out. And when we talked back and forth about what this talk would be about, I said, well, I haven't actually worked with Jeffrey on an exhibition, so I'm not sure I can talk for a full hour about working with Jeffrey. But he said, oh, maybe you should talk about just curating in general and kind of how you craft narrative through exhibitions and acquisitions. And so I'm going to do that. But as I started thinking about talking about Jeffrey, I realized that actually I have a lot more to say than I thought. And that if we look at a work that I brought into the Hirshhorn Collection. So I actually took this through I found this work of art actually after speaking with Jeffrey. I did a public program with him during the COVID pandemic. And after that, I was just so impressed with having met him and his practice. And I reached out to him and I said, what kind of work do you have available? And this was available. And I was like, oh, we really need this in the Hirshhorn Collection. So I managed to successfully bring this into the collection. So I thought that if we start by unpacking this object and maybe why it resonated with me, it's a good way to kind of then look at what I think is meaningful in art and the way people connect to it and how it's presented and how that has Jeffrey's practice is in some ways very aligned with my curatorial practice too, and I think that there's a good convergence there. So that is, in a nutshell, how I'm going to approach this talk with you today. And we will leave some time at the end so that you can ask me some questions if there are things that you were hoping I would talk about that I don't cover. But I do want to start. So this work is a work that Jeffrey did in 2020. So it's not so old. It's a pretty new piece of art. And it's called To Feel Myself Beloved on the Earth. I'm going to go to this first slide. And we're going to stay on this slide for a little while. This is a visually stunning work, as most of Jeffrey's work is. If any of you who know his work know that it's colorful. I wore this brightly colored skirt here in honor of Jeffrey's kind of color and patterns. He's somebody who's very exuberant in his artwork, and it is a punching bag. So it's kind of in the found object tradition. Those of you who know Marcel Duchamp and kind of his found art, the ready-made, the urinal that he took in 1917 and submitted to an art exhibition, and it kind of changed the future of what art materials could be, because people started talking about, do you have to make every element of an artwork, or can you use existing materials? So this is a piece that uses a found punching bag as its base. But then on top of that, he's covered it with plastic and glass beads and sinew. There's something about it because it's a punching bag, because it's an object that you stand near and you feel it in relation to your body. It is actually constructed to be human scaled, to be something that you interact with. There's a physicality to it. But another thing that really drew me to it is the strong narrative that is contained by this work, both a personal narrative and a sort of collective narrative, a way it connects both inwardly and outwardly. And so I think that's what I wanted to share with you first. This was kind of a product of a watershed moment in Jeffrey's career. After moving to New York as a young abstract painter, he very quickly grew disillusioned with the art world. And in 2005, there was a moment where he was receiving a batch of paintings back from another exhibition that he had sent them off to, and there was little fanfare, little acclaim. You know, you work so hard, you exhibit your work, and there's just no response, right? And so he was feeling that again. He got these paintings back, and on impulse, he took a knife and he cut the canvases out of their frames, and he picked them up and he walked them to the laundromat, and he sent them through the hot cycle 3 times. And he calls this a sort of cathartic cleansing moment for him. And he pulls these canvases out of the washing machine and he said, it was this really important moment because they emerged from the washer with the look of old textiles that revealed the histories on their surfaces. And in these washed canvases, so that like paint was buckling and peeling, the canvases were shrunken. In these, he saw a way to connect his work to the textiles and garments of traditional Native people. And this was really significant for him. This wasn't something he had really found before for himself. Jeffrey is a citizen of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, and he's half Cherokee, but he was not raised in a traditional tribal environment. He grew up in major cities in the United States, in Germany, and Korea, and England, and there he developed an interest in mixing Native American culture with global pop culture. But I don't think he had quite found the way to do it yet. But to him, when he started to think about it, traditional Native textiles and garments signified cultural pride. They were something that commanded respect, and they were also something that kind of visually announced to the world that you were living according to a different set of principles, that you had chosen a different sort of path. And this was something that spoke to him in this moment. And kind of from this time forward, he started to organize his practice differently in terms of what was kind of at the heart of it. He started to think about what it meant to be kind of an other to society and how to build bridges of communication. He also was on a personal journey at this time to understand his feelings about race, gender, and homophobia. And he was working through these feelings with a physical trainer who introduced him to the punching bag. And this was a means for him of working out his aggressions. And he soon began a series of punching bag artworks, embellished with materials such as beads, sequins, metal cones, and fringe that are associated with Native powwow cultures. And he felt that he would then turn these bags into figurative sculptures that refer to the body in both movement and in form. His trainer had also instructed him to name what he was punching in order to unify mental and physical experiences in the body. And so at this time he began to weave phrases onto the body of the bag as a way to kind of speak more directly to his viewers and kind of thinking about language and the role it plays in these sorts of transactions. He began with his own words first, but then he started to branch out to other people's words. And so to feel myself beloved on the earth comes from the last sentence of Late Fragment, which is the final poem in Raymond Carver's last published work, A New Path to the Waterfall. And the poem ends, as I've put it on the screen here, "And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth." So to me, these are all the ingredients of a really, really powerful work, right? It's got a strong personal narrative that is very important to the artist. It is part of kind of a major turning point in his work and his career and kind of his trajectory. It's also something that we can all relate to. We've all gone through periods of strife and turmoil. We've all had to have moments where we got expert advice and guidance on how to move forward, and we've all, language is something that's important to all of us, this means of communication that kind of lies at the core of what art is, a way of kind of funneling personal experience and communicating kind of epiphanies or even just points of view. And so to me, that this was a really, a joy and a coup and a real accomplishment to bring this into the Hirshhorn Collection, to the National Mall. This is also a work, and Jeffrey, as a member of the Native communities, is thinking a lot about, at this time too, about land acknowledgements and reparations. He is often using his work as a platform for others to speak about these things. He did this great project in New York at the, the sculpture garden there. And he did a stepped pyramid where, instead of doing an opening ceremony, he actually invited people to come and protest about land acknowledgement and reparations. And so this is something that I felt like in the nation's capital, to have this voice heard, to have this sentiment heard, that, we are all just trying to find a way to feel ourselves beloved on the earth, right? Was really quite powerful. In recent years, Jeffrey has also extended this impulse in convening community outwards in many different ways. So in 2023, he published a landmark book featuring the work of more than 60 Native North American artists that he called An Indigenous Present. And this is a really incredible accomplishment. It's a way to really kind of lift up the voices and practices and amplify the practices of others. And he continued this when he was selected as the first Indigenous artist to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale in 2024 with a solo show at the U.S. Pavilion. This is what the U.S. Pavilion normally looks like. And that's what Jeffrey did. It's pretty incredible. He had a team of more than 180 people work with him to do this. And he transformed the neoclassical structure into a vibrant and inclusive contemporary space centering on Indigenous art practices. His team of 180 people, it included builders and installers, but also activators. So he included performers, he included dancers, drummers, lecturers. He had a whole symposium that he hosted in this space. He really made it a community gathering spot. And you can see that in the very front here, he's created, with kind of capitals of columns, right? He's created, wait a minute, this is the interior. So this is what some of his artwork looks like. Really, really amazing pattern and textile. So this is kind of what he put on the interior of the building. But on the exterior, he basically created a performance stage, right? A way to gather community, to convene community, and to open the pavilion. During Vernissage, he did a jingle dance program. And so he had Native dancers there activating it. Here you can see it from above. He had so many members of his community come out and participate. So he used this extraordinary opportunity that was given him to amplify the voices of his whole community. You can see it there. So the invitation to come here gave me an opportunity to kind of reflect back on my own curatorial practice. So I've been at the Hirshhorn for 10 years now, a little over a decade, and I've been curating for 15 years. The first show I did was in 2011, and it was at the University of Maryland. It was when I was a brand new PhD candidate there, and I was given the opportunity to curate a show. It was supposed to be a collection show from the art gallery's collection, and somehow I convinced them to let me do a loan show instead. And I ended up doing a show that, unfortunately, because I was such a fresh curator, I do not have great photography of. But it was called Modernity Stripped Bare: Undressing the Nude in Contemporary Japanese Photography. And it looked at the way 6 different Japanese photographers dealt with the nude in their practice in a variety of ways. But one of the things that has been important to me from the start is, as Jeffrey does with his practice, finding a way to get people in the space and experience the art in more than one way, right? So, of course, it's amazing to have a gallery that is open, that people can come into, and they can walk up and they can have intimate, personal experiences with art objects. But I didn't want that to be the only way they saw this. So one of the things I felt quite serious about from the start, and luckily the gallery supported this, is commissioning a dance performance. So I worked with Naoko Mayashiba. We commissioned a dance performance from her, and these are 2 images of her in the gallery with the work of Ryudai Takano in the background. But she really created this amazing performance. She even, and I don't have images of this, but this is a photography exhibition, and she hung these pieces of plexi that were kind of slightly mirrored, but you could also see through them, and she hung them at varying places in the gallery, but they would kind of twist and turn very slowly while she was moving through the space, reflecting her as well as the audience. She also brought in a musician. So Yoko Kei came in and created a score to accompany her performance. And, it was a really robust and kind of fulfilling experience. At the same time, I also organized a graduate student conference. So I got other researchers, other graduate students to come to the gallery space and talk about their own research having to do with the body in contemporary culture. And so we did that, and all of these were kind of layers and lenses through which people could come to the kind of material and the artist practice that was happening within the space of the gallery, but bring their own perspectives and share their own perspectives. This is something that has been a real through line for me, trying to find ways to think about how people move through an exhibition, to think about their bodies, to think about the sensations that are created for them, and how you can kind of orchestrate or choreograph different experiences for them. And I think for me, this also partly comes from the fact that I come from a modern dance background. So, Corey said that my undergraduate is in integrative arts. That's because I was doing dance choreography. So I was at a university that allowed me to kind of dabble in anything I wanted to as inspiration for my choreographic practice and kind of pull it back into my practice. And so when I started, and I grew up in a small town, college town, but in a dance program that was crafted by a woman named Betty Jane Dittmar, that actually taught kids choreography from the age of 5. And it taught kids choreography through art. So we started by learning kind of folk dance and things like that, but then at a certain point, my teacher would say, okay, look at this painting. Let's look at this painting together. Let's figure out what we feel like are the defining features of this painting. Maybe it's the orthogonal lines. Maybe it's the 2 figures and the way they're kind of facing each other in profile. How can we kind of strip out the framework of that and then turn it into a dance? And that's how we would do it. And so when I got to graduate school for art history, when I kind of found my way there, what became so exciting to me about art history is that I had been kind of like taking all of the information in, like an artist does, and turning it into an artwork of some sort, a dance. But I realized that an art historian could do it in reverse, right? You find the artwork, and then you start unpacking you start untangling the strings. You start figuring out, how and where it connects to everyday life, to the life of the artist, to the life of the community, to the culture, to the times, to the messages they would have received, to the history of art. And all of this is so exciting. So as a curator, what becomes powerful about that is you're both working with art history and with art objects, but also with space and bodies and colors and movement, and so when I landed at the Hirshhorn, I did this actually after being at Glenstone for a while. So I worked for Glenstone in Potomac, Maryland, which is, it was a private collection. It's now a nonprofit museum. But, when I worked for Glenstone, I actually started there as a docent. I was a grad student and I saw a call for docents, and so I applied and I was like, I wonder what this is like. I don't even know what this collection is, right? I want to see behind these doors. And so they hired me, and my job would be to walk through exhibitions that had no text or no labels, nothing. I would be the sole point of contact for a person's journey through this exhibition. And I would greet them at their car and I would walk them through. If it was a single person, it would just be me and that person. If it was a group, it would be a group of 8. But it would be non-formulaic and it would just be a conversation. And I learned in that people see things in art very differently from one another. They kind of gravitate to the things that resonate with their lives, right? And if you can find a way to kind of make those connections for them, to kind of feed them with information that's meaningful to them, you can create a meaningful experience. So as I came to curating at the Hirshhorn, I came with all of that background. And this is actually a work that occurred before my time at the Hirshhorn. It occurred, actually, I think I was a fellow at the Hirshhorn in 2011, 2012, before I later became a curator there in 2016. So it might have been on the cusp of when I was a fellow there. But this is a work by Doug Aiken, where he wrapped the entire museum in a projection that occurred every night from dusk until midnight, and it had sound. And it was just the most incredible thing, turning the museum into kind of a cinema, but a cinema in the round, right? And so this was kind of what I thought of as the Hirshhorn, right? And so it was this incredible place where maybe there could be a new rethinking of what an exhibition could be, and a real interest in bodies and space and movement. And the very first project I really took on when I came to the Hirshhorn was the first durational performance that happened in the museum that lasted the length of the exhibition. So this exhibition was about a 3-month exhibition. It was Ragnar Kjartansson. He's an Icelandic artist, and we had never done this at the Hirshhorn before. The Hirshhorn had never tried to have a performer in the gallery 9:30, 10 to 5, I get 5:30, which is what museum hours are. So the whole day, every day of an exhibition. And so that was my job. It was kind of given to me, like, you figure out how to do this. And the work is called Woman in E. It has a single female musician on stage wearing this kind of floor-length gown. She's standing on a 2-tiered platform that has tinsel. This was a work that Kjartansson had first done in Detroit, so he was thinking of car showrooms and kind of how cars are turned around. But he's also an artist who has a romantic sensibility, but also kind of a very sharp wit about him as well. And so Woman in E, he had them playing an E minor chord. That's all they were playing. Over and over and over again. And the E minor chord is supposed to be the most melancholic chord there is. And so they were supposed to be up there kind of feeling and exuding this melancholy as they're standing on this rotating platform and playing this over and over again. So I had to figure out, how do we organize a team of people who are going to be interested in doing this and available for doing this? And how do we organize it, just like how long can a person stand on a pedestal for without having to get off? And so they would do 2.5-hour shifts. We'd have 3 2.5-hour shifts every day. I had a team of 13 musicians that were all heavily invested in the conceptual side of this piece. They all were really interested in what would happen to them as musicians if they played an E minor chord for so long, and how. I mean, this is a part of Kjartansson's practice, is recognizing his parents were actually actors. So he would see them perform the same lines over and over and over again and rehearse them and understand that in repetition, there is a great range of variety, right? So like repetition, even though you think you're doing the same thing, you never do it the same way twice. And that's what these musicians were saying, But we had a green room for them where they were leaving notes to each other the whole show. And like, it became a real community. And that for me is one of the most special things I've had the opportunity to do at the Hirshhorn, because first off, you have a body in the exhibition. I mean, that's a different way for people to connect with art. Like, I think, the exhibition as a whole, so this was a full floor exhibition. It had painting in it, had sculpture in it, it had many rooms of video. So, people are experiencing all this different media produced by the same artist. But then to actually experience a living person doing a thing with sound, and especially such a strange thing, is very unique and special. And I think people lock into that, and it connects them in a different sort of way. Also, just the fact that it allowed us as a museum to connect our community in a different way. All of a sudden, we had 13 musicians who felt like they were a part of the museum in a way that was very different than they had ever experienced before. They were behind the scenes, they were the artwork, they met the artist, he gave them notes. Like there's a different sort of kind of interchange and exchange that's happening there. And we did make sure, there was something about this that felt very, anonymous, and these are all amazing musicians. So we did make sure that there was a day where we had them with their bands playing on the plaza. We were like, we want them to also be able to exhibit what they can really do. They have skill. So that was special too. But there was, this community building aspect of this piece operated on so many levels. And that's something that I think is really, really critical. And this is something I got to experience again with a work by a Thai artist that is in the collection, Hirshhorn, and he is somebody who I have had the pleasure now to work with twice on 2 different installations of this work. This work is called Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Green. It's a work that he first did in 2010 in Bangkok, and it has 2 major components to it. One links back to kind of the watershed moment in Hirshhorn's practice, which is when he was at the University of Chicago, seeing in the art institutes kind of vitrines and on pedestals these vessels that were used for cooking, these Thai vessels that should be used for cooking, but instead were now not used functionally at all, and they were set on pedestals and kind of enclosed. And he had this moment where he said, why don't we use them for cooking still? Like, why is food not brought into a museum? Like, why do we separate museums in this way? Why are we putting things behind glass? Why are we deciding that an art object has to be preserved in a way that maybe cuts it off from the thing that it was built to do, right? And so he started hosting potlucks in museums and galleries. And that is a key part of his practice today. He is a convener, he's a community builder. And so this includes serving red, yellow, and green curry in the gallery every day for lunch. So that happens, that's a part of this installation. But the other part is connected to another project that he's had, a long ongoing project, where he takes images of protests from newspapers, so newspaper images, and he asks artists to draw them. And so in this gallery, he's collected many images of protest, and he's asked artists to draw them on the wall. So throughout the duration of this installation, there is a team of artists working every day drawing on the wall in charcoal. They're just drawing right on top of each other too. They're just, they come in, there's no plan. They have a sort of database of images that has been selected by the artist and his team that they can draw from, but they can decide where it goes. They decide if they're making it really tiny or really large, if they're going to nestle it inside somebody else's painting or drawing or what they're going to do. And so it is this like very active, evolving installation that once again connects to the community in so many ways. It's like, bringing artists into the museum, giving them a role, connecting them to this other artist who has an international kind of stage that he's operating on. And also, this is a sort of site-specific work in that when he first created it in Bangkok, it was done with images of protests in Bangkok. And then when he brought it to us, to Washington, D.C., he added in images of protests in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. So it's mixing the imagery from Bangkok with DC. And then when we took it to Chicago, so we took it to Wrightwood, 659 in Chicago, several years after we did it in DC, he added in more imagery of protests from Chicago, and their team there was doing that. And so I think it'll just keep building that kind of archive of images, that database of images every time we do this. And this is in the Hirshhorn Collection, so I think there are some future plans in the works to do it again. But it's, it's a really special project. And, it calls people in, it serves them food, asks them to sit down, eat together, sit and talk together. It creates space for conversations right alongside the art. So I wanted to end by telling you about something that I've done most recently. And this is actually the image of the intro wall for an exhibition that I curated with Marina Isgro. We co-curated this exhibition. We were asked to do a collection show for the Hirshhorn's 50th anniversary. The Hirshhorn was opened in 1974, so we turned 50 in 2024. And so Marina and I were kind of tasked with this very large task of, how do you do a 50th anniversary collection show? We have a very large collection at the Hirshhorn. There's about 13,000 objects. We have a founding donor, Joseph Hirshhorn, who gave roughly 12,000 of those 13,000 objects. So, really a substantial part of the collection came from him. And curators have then, of course, been adding to it. And very cognizant of the narratives that it already contains and thinking about what we think it needs, like holes that need to be filled, or even ways that contemporary artists working today are connecting to some of the other narratives in the collection. And that's one of the things we really kind of hit upon in doing this show. You can actually see in this very first image, these are actually works by two contemporary artists. But if you look at the fine type here, it says Revolutions, art from the Hirshhorn Collection, 1860 to 1960. So the main thrust of the show, the main narrative kind of thrust of it was a sort of linear narrative. We realized if we went past 1960, work starts getting really big. So at a certain point, we were like, we're going to have to cut this. We're going to have to divide it into 3 shows, maybe. And so this was the first of 3. The second one is a large installation show that's already opened on the 3rd floor. And then the third will be like 1960 on, because work after 1960 gets very large. So trying to do all of that in one show is going to be impossible. But we didn't want, since this was the 50th anniversary, we didn't want to leave out contemporary artists, because we felt like it was really important to kind of show where the collection started and also where it is today. So these colorful walls that we dropped inside the exhibition, those signal the contemporary artists. And this one here, Nicola Parti didn't get a colorful pedestal. His work is colorful enough. He's a Swiss artist working today. So there are a couple of platforms as well that hold contemporary artworks. But these are works here by Nicola Parti and Amoako Boafo, a Swiss artist and a Ghanaian artist working today. thinking about portraiture, thinking about figuration. And in this first, we paired Boafo with a John Singer Sargent, thinking in some ways where Hirshhorn's collection began. He said that he grew up with a calendar of salon painting on his wall when he was a young kid, and so when he started collecting, that's what he thought art was, salon style painting. And so John Singer Sargent, of course, being someone who was exhibiting in the Paris salons and somebody who was commissioned to paint very large portraits by wealthy clients, and who was meant to make them very idealized. These people didn't want to necessarily have all of their wrinkles showing or all of their blemishes, right? And so idealized portraiture for the wealthy class versus Amwako Boafo, living and working today, who's often painting these very similar scale, same scale, right? Giving these very large canvases over to friends, family, people, images of people he finds on the internet, but also kind of working in a more abstract way. So another kind of through line we found through all of this was kind of the tension between abstraction and figuration, and the kind of how artists start wielding moments of abstraction to depict movement and to depict emotion. And, Amwako Boafo works with a gloved hand, so it's kind of finger painting to start. And so you get this lovely texture in the painting. And then he kind of goes in later and adds these kind of fine-tuned elements with a brush. I'm just going to show you a couple of images of this exhibition. This is a really lovely moment. So part of creating a narrative in an exhibition, we thought a lot about narrative in this. I mean, it was really challenging in some ways. But part of creating a narrative is, you're trying to figure out, okay, chronology. You've got a chronological narrative that kind of creates itself. But you're also thinking thematically, right? You kind of want a thematics that kind of gives people some sort of footing. But you're also thinking compositionally. And I love this pairing of these Calders. These are Alexander Calder mobiles, the line work up here with these Miro paintings, right? Where, he's known for, he's a surrealist, known for automatic drawing, and so there's this amazing free line. Surrealists were really trying to tap into dream states and the irrational and the unconscious. They were trying to figure out how to make a composition that their rational mind would not create, right? And so there's this element of automatic drawing, and so if you saw this up close, you would see this beautiful kind of figure created out of this line work that just looks so nice with these Calders up above. And so these were, moments that were really joyful moments as a curator. We also thought about, and this is harder to see in this image, but you can see it a little bit, we thought about how bodies were moving through these spaces. So these walls, I told you we had these colorful walls that have the contemporary artwork on them. They were also freestanding, and they had artworks hung on the front and the back, and people could move around them. So we started thinking about how giving people other ways to move through the space. Here's a really lovely pairing between Leger, kind of known for these sort of tubular figures that he would do, tubism. So this is a very sort of neoclassic in some ways portrait, but also thinking too of kind of the factory industrial era too. There's something about that tubism that he was doing that feels very industrial. And then these are two Picassos from the collection here. And then this is a work by a contemporary artist named Genesis Tremaine, who is a devotional painter. That's how she characterizes herself. And she really feels that she is channeling the Holy Spirit onto her canvases as she paints. But she, we are very familiar with Picasso's Cubism that he and Brock developed, where you kind of display many planes of the face and many parts of the face. There is a sort of dislocation of some of the elements of a body that you would normally have thought that, you know, maybe an eye should go here and here, but like he'll put it like up here. And so Tremaine, really thinking of eyes as portals, and, you know, has so many eyes kind of across her figure. And so we just loved seeing this juxtaposition, this conversation, this narrative between Picasso and between Tremaine. And then down this hallway, this was actually something we struggled with a little bit, but there were works in the collection by Haitian painters from kind of the late 1940s that had never been put on view. We really wanted to put them on view, and they were working very much in the voodoo tradition. There is a sort of deep mysticism embedded and ritualism embedded in the images they were painting. Hector Hippolyte is a main one. I wish I had brought a close-up, but I didn't. But he's a key one. But we had a hard time. We're thinking about when you do just chronology, it's hard to resolve kind of like, you know, you have a narrative of what's happening in Europe at this time, and then what's happening in Haiti at this time is very different, right? How do you connect them? We found actually my colleague Marina is the first one who kind of discovered this, but a connection between André Breton, who was the theorist of the Surrealists, who actually went to Haiti and viewed Hippolyte's paintings in 1947 and said, oh, they're unintentional surrealists. And so we're like, okay, here we go. We can put these Haitian painters here with the surrealists, and they make total sense. But that's another one of these like narrative moments where you're just kind of trying to figure out, you don't want to present a teleological view of history. History is not a linear line, right? Things are not linear projections, right? Like they do not move from one thing to the next. Artwork opens out like that, right? Spheres of influence overlap. Different things happen, sometimes at the same time in different parts of the world, which is really amazing. That sort of like historical synchronicity that can happen is incredible, and you can see it happen. And you've got to think there's something happening kind of on the global stage that's filtering into all of these artists simultaneously. But also at the same time, there are artists who are like these Haitian painters who are very much working outside of the academy. They're not in these other conversations, and they're doing really important work. And how do you present that in a show like this? I mean, that's one of the things we really struggled with. I just wanted to show this because it's just like such a lovely pairing. So we have Loie Hollowell, who is a painter who's really interested in transcendental painting. And she works on these sculpted canvases. So these are actually created by her husband, who's a sculptor. He helps her create these sculpted canvases that she paints on top of. But so there's like actually a ledge here where these sorts of like half circles protrude out from the canvas. And then she uses that ledge and she makes it sort of textured on that ledge and white, and it actually bounces light back onto the painting. So the painting kind of provides its own sort of movement of light within it. This is a work she calls Boob Wheel. She creates many works based on her own experience as a mother. She said she was breastfeeding at this time, and she felt like she was breastfeeding around the clock. So that is what is happening here at the center. But we loved pairing it with Georgia O'Keeffe, of course, who is very well known for finding the body in landscape, right? The female body specifically. And then Arthur Dove, who's known for really layering color into the landscape in very important emotive ways. And this is, I think, the last view I'm going to give you. So this is later in the exhibition. We're thinking about the post-war period here, when artists really, World War II was so traumatic. And you can see it in Giacometti's practice here. So this is Giacometti, a Swiss artist, here on this light well. This was another element we included in this exhibition, because we knew we didn't want seas of pedestals floating about. We had over 200 artworks in this exhibition. And so to put small sculptures on pedestals was just not gonna work. And we worked with a designer who suggested moving towards these light wells, which were a great solution. And so we see Giacometti's work the Hirshhorn, because of Joe Hirshhorn and the way he collected deep in artists, and he collected Giacometti's work directly from Pierre Matisse Gallery. We have the best collection of Giacometti's work on the East Coast. So we beat out New York, which is rare. But so we have this amazing Giacometti collection. But on the left side here, you can kind of see these are more sort of surrealist works that he was creating before the war. And then everything else here is after World War II, where his figures get very attenuated and kind of emaciated. And there is like a sort of pathos that is involved with them. This dog, he didn't do many animals, but he did a dog. He did one other animal. I can't remember what it is at the moment. But he said that's like a self-portrait. He had been thinking about doing a dog for a long time, and he said one day he was walking back home along the river in the rain, and he felt just like a stray dog on the street. And so that's a self-portrait here. And then images of his brother. But these we have kind of framing this amazing view of these second generation abstract expressionists. And when I say art gets big after 1960, this is what I mean. Like around this time, things start getting really, really big. So we have Joan Mitchell, of course. We've got Lee Krasner over here, Helen Frankenthaler, Morris Lewis, Franz Klein. We've got Diebenkorn, you get back in there, Alma Thomas, and it's just this lovely moment where it's almost like, this is almost like a Japanese garden. Like you get to kind of see, it's these views that you get to create in an exhibition. You think about these long views and kind of what opens up and how you're seeing art through other art. And I think that's one of the amazing things that we're able to do in the Hirshhorn, largely because also we have these sweeping galleries because it's a round building. I mean, there are definite cons to working in a round building, but there are these amazing benefits as well. I wanted to end by showing you a performance, a snippet of a performance that I curated, that I commissioned for the celebratory weekend for this show and for the museum. This was for the museum's 50th anniversary. So Maya Chow and Ethan Philbrick are artists who wrote a musical score called Agents of Deterioration. Agents of Deterioration are the 10 agents that work against material works that conservators have identified that work against artworks. So they are thinking about kind of what a museum is, what it does, what a collection does, what conservators do, like how artwork is protected for future generations and what that means. And they worked with the Children's Chorus of Washington, D.C. to lead choral tours of the collection. I'm gonna see, I don't know how I do this. Oh, here we go. If I can just play a snippet of this for you. Is it loud enough?
Welcome.
Oh no! Well, you can hear them.
Shoot, sorry.
So maybe we can't?
Yeah, let me see if I can troubleshoot.
Well, as he tries to troubleshoot it. So basically we had two very young children start singing and welcoming people. They were kind of the guides, the docents that welcomed people into the exhibition. And then it went through, there was a group of, I can't even remember the total number of children who were participating in this, but they ranged in age from kind of early teens to high school. And they were singing people through the collection, and it was really lovely. We did several performances over the weekend celebrating the 50th anniversary of the museum. Oh, there you go, maybe you can get it.
Sorry, the sound's not too big.
Welcome, follow me.
But it was just like this amazing thing because again, we got to bring children into the museum. These are children who are used to doing performances around the world. They actually travel quite a lot, but not necessarily used to working in a museum. They got to have
This is an exhibition of works from the permanent collection at the Hirshhorn Museum. The oldest work in the show is from 1864. I was negative 148 years old. Permanent from Middle English, permanence, permanens from Latin, permaneo. Meaning enduring, unchanging, unchanged, lasting or intended to last indefinitely. Remaining, holding out, continuing, staying to the end.
Let's see if I can. I think it might be too much to skip forward, but anyway, I'll leave it there for now. Because I do want to create an opportunity. I know we're at time, but if anybody has any questions they want to ask, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah.
Two questions. My first one, who wrote this, who composed this music for us?
So Maya Chow is a social practice artist. She's based in Baltimore and Philadelphia. She actually is included in the Whitney Biennial right now, which is incredibly exciting. But she worked with Ethan Philbrick, who is a choral composer. So they together they wrote a score.
Okay. It's very reminiscent of a Catholic Mass.
Yes, yes, very much so. And yeah, I mean, the way the voices filled the space. I mean, the Hirshhorn also, because it's circular and because of, the concrete aggregate and the way it's constructed and the travertine, voices just sound travels in kind of crazy ways. And, if we want to control sound, that can be very challenging. But for something like this, they really capitalized on that, I think. Yeah.
And then my other question, the piece with all the artists coming together to draw the protest images, you said that was in the collection.
It is.
So how do you have something like that in the collection where it changes over time?
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's and I think Silhouette, if you know anything about Silhouette's wall drawings. So Silhouette is a conceptual artist, I suppose one would say, but also, it manifests in material ways. But he really, I think, pioneered this method of providing instructions. So there is an instruction for installation, right? And so for his wall drawings, they don't have to be exactly the same every time a lot of the time. Some of the instructions are start at the lower left corner with a wiggly line that goes up to the right, and then trace it again, and then, create another one to the side of it, and so some of his wall drawings are like that, and that is a work of art. And so he creates a sort of framework in words for how the work gets executed. And later artists, such as Rick Tirvanit, have kind of capitalized on that. And so it becomes a framework. So we have a set of instructions for how the work gets executed. And Rare specifically, because it is, there is a team of artists who has to be brought on board. So usually a delegate from the artist studio will come and work with the artists to kind of answer their questions and help them troubleshoot and problem solve, at least for the first couple of weeks of installation, and then they can kind of run it on their own after that. But yeah, so it is something for him specifically that we do in tandem with him. But we have acquired, I've been very privileged to be a part of the first couple of performance acquisitions at the museum. So we have acquired a couple of performances during my time. And the first ever was the most exciting, actually, because it was Tino Segal. We have a work in the collection called This You by Tino Segal, which requires, and I actually managed the first installation of this at our museum as well, but it's a team of vocalists. So you have a single singer who is positioned somewhere outside the museum, and when a visitor comes within a certain kind of distance of them, they sing a song for them. But the interesting thing about this is that Tino doesn't believe in written documents. They have an environmental part of their practice, so they don't want any written documents. They don't believe in contracts and signatures. Everything is transferred with a handshake. So a team of us had to go to New York to shake hands with the artist to seal the deal. But doing this within a government system, like trying to find a way, we had to work very closely with the lawyer, with the government lawyer, to try to find a way to actually purchase a work of art without a written contract, which was a real thing. But so for Tino's work, for this you have at the institution, you have keepers of the knowledge. So I'm one of the keepers of the knowledge at the Hirshhorn for that work. And if I were to leave the Hirshhorn, I need to pass my knowledge along to somebody else before I leave. Yeah.
I have a question about the current exhibition at the Hirshhorn, Basquiat and Banksy.
Oh yeah, of course.
And what the thinking was behind that, to bring those two artists together. You actually get to meet Banksy.
Oh no. Unfortunately not, although I'm told that he might have come through the exhibition. I have a friend who knows Banksy who says that. But actually that was those, so those two paintings, the Basquiat is a work from 1982. There's this beautiful large painting that Basquiat did when he was 21 years old that shows a young boy, a young African-American boy, in a park with his dog playing in the spray of a red New York fire hydrant. So it's called Boy and Dog with a Johnny Pump. And when that work was exhibited at the Barbican in London, Banksy did a mural on the street outside where he appropriated the boy and dog from this kind of playful summer scene, and instead he put them in these sort of dystopic grays, and he inserted two police officers who are then kind of, one is frisking the boy and the other one looks like they're kind of interrogating the boy as if he's done something wrong. And so, social commentary. Also, perhaps adding a sort of lens on Basquiat's own life, because, as a young African-American man growing up in New York in the 70s and really coming into his own in the 80s, there are numerous stories of kind of racism that he encountered. His friends will talk about how even after he had been selling his paintings for so much money and he had, dollar bills just like pouring out of his pockets, he had all of the money, he still couldn't hail a cab, right? So those two paintings, we really wanted to show them together, and it's the first time that so basically Banksy's practice, when he did it in London, it was a mural on the street, but his practice also includes making sort of reproducing, kind of making new iterations of his mural works in other sorts of media. So this is a painting that is on wood panel. It's a triptych that is based on that mural. And they've never been shown together in an indoor museum space before. So that was the impulse behind this show, was to show those. And then we built it out just a little bit more with some Basquiat works on paper to kind of to show the practice that Basquiat had as an artist, to really show his visual language and where he came from. This work also kind of all went on view in the basement level of our museum, on the lower level, at the same time that we had a large show by Os Gêmeos, the Brazilian twins who do graffiti art and have really managed to kind of navigate between both the streets and the museums, doing both outdoor installations and big museum displays. And we really saw this Basquiat Banksy show as a way to kind of ground that historically, because Basquiat was one of the first artists to make that leap, to really be kind of coming out of the street tradition and then move into the gallery and museums. And that was a big move to make in the early 80s when he did it. But he paved the way for later artists like Banksy, who does that as well, and then Os Gêmeos. So it was kind of a multi-tiered museum programming decision too. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. I'm here if you want to come up and just ask a question in person.